Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
US Department of Defense or Pentagon has produced its annual assessment on the Chinese military preparedness. It is called Military and Security Developments Involving People's Republic of China. You can see the jacket, the cover page. I will also share the whole report with you. It's 192 pages. But let me tell you that if you are a military or defense buff, you will read all 192 pages just like that without pausing. Even if you are not one of those military buffs, because everybody has a stake in what the Chinese are thinking and doing in military terms, in strategic terms, in security terms, you will find it very interesting, very important, very significant. And this is the kind of primary material we should read. So I've spent a lot of this Friday, when I should have actually been reflecting on my national interest for this evening, reading up these 192 pages. Mind you, 10 pages out of the 192 are actually just glossary of abbreviations or acronyms towards the end, because it's military stuff and militaries love acronyms. So 10 pages. Nevertheless, I've read this and I will explain to you as briefly as I can what this means for the world, what this means especially for India, and what it means for the balance of power, and what is the meaning of the Chinese revisionist view of the global balance of power, both militarily and strategically, and on top of that, ideologically, because they are now onto something more significant than just pushing their neighbors around. So before I go into the details of this very extensive and expansive report and maybe pull out some nuggets for you, let me just pick up the thread from the appeal I made to you to take paid subscriptions to ThePrint in the previous episode of CutTheClutter. So of course, take paid subscriptions, please. The only problem right now is monthly subscriptions, because RBI, in its eternal wisdom or maybe lack of wisdom, has decided that recurring payments will not work. So I said, and I'm saying again, please take one-time subscriptions or quarterly or once a year basis until RBI sorts out this issue. Again, many of you have asked me from overseas if they have the same problem also. I'm told, and I believe, if you're overseas and if you are taking subscriptions from there, then this problem is not there. You can take recurring monthly subscriptions. So please do not worry and carry on, because we need these subscriptions desperately. Without that, free media cannot exist. And you know what? We talk about digital India. We talk about news going digital across the world. But we have a strange situation in India, and it can only happen in a country or an economy which is so bureaucratically run that today you can buy a copy of India Today magazine for 75 rupees, right? You can buy a copy of Filmfare for 60 rupees. You can buy a copy of Vogue. I mean, I might be mentioning it today. It might have featured on my head, mainly because the latest issue has Neeraj Chopra on the cover, the javelin thrower. But Vogue is 200 rupees. I'm not complaining about anybody's price. People should charge what the market will pay. You can buy the Hindu for 10 rupees a day, that is 300 rupees a month. But the fact is that when you pay, there is no GST paid on that. Anything in print, somebody can charge 5,000 rupees for their magazine or newspaper. There is no GST. It is only for us, digital publications, that there is GST, and that too at the rate of 18%. So we have to deal with that also. So please keep this money coming. And if you're overseas, you have no problem with recurring payments. You carry on with that. Now, back to this report. This report, 192 pages, it has some highlights. I will tell you what is more specific to India and to our region, because a lot of the newspapers, including our defense editors, Snehesh, Alex, Philip, because that's the newsiest part, they have picked up on that, and there's a story by Snehesh which I will share with you, which essentially says that China used this standoff on the line of actual control with India to maybe rehearse many processes, to learn many things, to improve its preparedness, etc., etc. And the report says some other things to do with Tibet, Xinjiang, borders with India, what the Chinese want, their Western Theater Command. I will come to that. But that at the moment I see little bit bordering on the tactical. Strategically, Here are the highlights of this report that worries or that should concern the entire world. I mean, that should concern, I corrected myself from just saying worries, because this will worry China's adversaries. But this is even important for China's non-adversaries or even allies, because this is a very rare insight into the Chinese military strategic mind. And all of us learn because there's so much mystery about China. So first of all, a phrase, great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Now, Xi Jinping has been talking about it. The date set for that is 2049. Why? Because that is 100 years of People's Republic of China, effectively 100 years of CCP, Chinese Communist Party rule. So by 2049, certain things have to be achieved, and one of those things is that US military power has to be overshadowed by China's by then, which means that this report, US report says, Pentagon report says that China has a target of becoming a bigger military power, stronger military power than even the US by 2049. How much time is left to that? You can calculate. It's only 28 years that is left to that. Both in influence, power, and military presence. They want to be ahead of America. And this analysis goes on to say the Chinese now want to revise the international order in such a way that it becomes more advantageous to Beijing's authoritarian system and national interests. Number two, that despite COVID, the Chinese have continued strengthening their military, and they've now come up with the idea of dual circulation. So that is the second thing I pick up. So many catchphrases, right? First is great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Second is dual circulation. So what is dual circulation? Dual circulation is that, okay, so far you ran an economy which basically was fired or fueled by exports. Now exports are slowing down, and increasingly exports will come down. So increase domestic demand. So have domestic demand fire up your economy, fuel your economy. At the same time, focus on high-tech industry, focus on those elements of exports which are crucial to supply chains, and keep your domination there and also increase it there. So that is dual circulation, that your domestic demand is driving your economy, whereas you then start leveraging your ability to either supply or stop the supply or deny these critical elements in supply chains. That is dual circulation. Number three, this analysis says that the Chinese approach, Chinese strategic military approach, is based on the idea that there will be rivalry among big powers and big states, but also clash of ideologies. So at the end of this, by 2049, they want to convince the world that the ideology and the system that works well, and if you ask the Chinese, they will say the quote unquote, the democracy that works best is the Chinese communist style democracy, right? That is the ideological battle. Number four, the Chinese now are set to build what they might call as the community of common destiny, right? Which means it could be another name for OBOR, one belt, one road, but to say that your allies should not just be connected or dependent on you militarily and strategically, but also economically and infrastructurally. And all of this is one integrated campaign, and this results in the Chinese Communist Party's revisionist vision of the world, of the international order, right? Where Chinese Communist Party is showing the way. So they become a kind of leader of this new world 2049 onwards. 2019, they asked armed forces, the Chinese asked their armed forces to become central, start playing a central role in their foreign policy. Now, it's very important in the case of China, because as this report also explains, and I'll share this visual with you, where this is the section of the report where they explain how the Chinese army, PLA, the People's Liberation Army, which has People's Liberation Army, PLA, People's Liberation Army Air Force, and People's Liberation Army Navy, and there is Rocket Force and there is Strategic Force. But PLA is not a national army. It is not an army that serves a state. It's an army that serves a party. It's an instrument of the party. That is something that we need to understand. And I will go into it a little bit more a little later. But you can see this screenshot where the definition of a party-owned army is written in bold letters. That's a very important point. We have to understand that. The next catchphrase is MCF. That is military civil fusion, which means everything the military does, everything your civil power does or civil economy does, they should move in unison. So they both complement each other. So this is MCF means that your development strategy should be to build integral national security strategic system and capabilities in support of PRC's national rejuvenation goals. And this has details which I will come to in a couple of minutes. Right now. Number 7, towards this end, acquire dual-use technologies, deepen reform in national defense research and defense production organization. Very important. Number 8, for this military civil fusion development strategy, 6 interrelated efforts are needed. I told you I'll tell you this in detail in just a bit, so I've come to that. Number 1, fusing defense industrial base and civil tech and industrial base. Number 2, integrating and leveraging science and technology across military and civil sectors. Number 3, cultivating and blending military and civil talents, which means people, say scientists, others can go from one stream to the other, civil to military, military to civil. Easier in a communist country than in any other situation, but that's what they are. They are a communist country, so that's where they are headed. Number 4, military requirements should be woven into civil infrastructure. You saw a little bit of an example of that. You've been seeing it lately. You see these fighter planes landing on our expressways also. That is one example of military requirements being blended into civil infrastructure. And similarly, leveraging civil construction for military purposes. So you see all these tunnels coming up, all these new bridges coming up, new airports coming up, new railways coming up, reaching right up to the other end of Tibet, starting from Beijing. This is civil infrastructure, but this also helps the military effort. Number 5, leverage civil services and logistics for military. India has begun to do a little bit of it lately. Until now, everything the military did, it did by itself. Number 6, expanding and deepening national defense mobilization systems, which means bringing to bear all the strength of Chinese society and economy when need comes for a massive mobilization. And they showed us last year how quickly they could mobilize forces and pile them along the line of control. In fact, Indian Army finally got its act together and matched up quite well, but the pace at which the Chinese moved was quite a surprise. Number 8 of the catchphrases, again, Chinese People's Liberation Army will develop a joint operations doctrine which is based on, and this is the catchphrase, informatization and intelligentization, which means you will use a lot of artificial intelligence, a lot of electronic warfare, a lot of electronic espionage, and everything will be system controlled. Everything will be electronically controlled. Number 9 is something called, that's also a catchphrase, A2AD. I told you militaries love acronyms. A2AD. A2AD. That is anti-access area denial, which means if the Chinese want to take over Taiwan, and there's a great deal of detail in this report on how the Chinese are planning to assault Taiwan and take it by force if they wish to, but then somebody wants to intervene. Say the Americans want to intervene, or America and their allies want to intervene. How do you deny this area to them? That is called A2AD. So Chinese have developed capabilities, particularly in what is called as first island chain. Now, first island chain, second island chain, and then it goes to third, fourth, fifth. That is another cluttered subject. Maybe someday we'll do an entire episode of CutTheClutter on this. But this is something that was developed by the Americans when Cold War was just starting, and the Chinese have now adopted. So this works, and this works for both sides. So both sides used it. So as reasonable understanding would dictate to you, first island chain is the first set of islands up to a certain part of Japan, Taiwan, etc., next to China. The term actually was invented by John Foster Dulles, who was the author of the Cold War doctrine on the American side in early 50s. In fact, John Foster Dulles was the one who said that you have to contain Soviet Union through 5 island chains, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In fact, the fourth island chain would then include, say, Lakshadweep, Maldives, etc. But we are not going there right now. John Foster Dulles did many things, some interesting, some disruptive, but his legacy still continues. And if I may just take an aside, I will tell you that Winston Churchill never liked him, and he described him once as the only bull who carries his own china shop. He also called him duller, dullest. So this island chain idea was John Foster Dulles. It's now back on the rails with our discussion today. Number 10, the American assessment says the Chinese capability of A2AD, that is anti-access area denial, is the strongest within the first island chain, but is now quite strong in the second island chain and is expanding. Remember, they've even got a base in Djibouti, one in Gwadar now. That will go beyond the fourth island chain in fact. So they are really expanding. 11, the report says that China is working on its chemical and biological research in such a way that America can no longer certify the Chinese commitment to Chemical Weapons Convention. Report also talks about Chinese military biological labs working on new toxins and new biological destructive agents. So once again, they say, although China signed the Chemical Weapons Convention earlier, ratified in 97, made its declarations, etc. in 98, but even now they are saying that US government cannot certify that the Chinese are adhering to their commitments on Chemical Weapons Convention. Number 13, this analysis shows that the Chinese PLA and the Chinese Communist Party are working on a doctrine of information operations, which is a combination of cyber espionage, artificial intelligence, psychological warfare. So information operations, or IO, is the way to go. Now, there are some other interesting insights here. For example, weapon systems. So this tells us that compared to the Air Force and the Navy, in fact, the biggest expansion, the most spectacular increase is in the Chinese Navy, that is the PLA Navy, because it is now the largest navy in the world by way of the number of vessels it employs, including surface combatants, and it's adding more at a very fast rate. It's quite alarming, in fact, the way they have shifted their emphasis to the Navy. Air Force is also doing well, but the report says it's PLA Army which has lagged behind the other two. That is now catching up, and some new systems mentioned in this report are PCL 171 self-propelled 122 mm howitzer, which is mounted on an assault vehicle chassis. There are also new artillery weapons, that is PCL 81, which is a self-propelled 155 mm howitzer, and also a Z8L helicopter, which is a heavy lift, 15-ton heavy lift helicopter. All that's being done, and all of these are very significant for India, because all these have already been either deployed or tested by the Chinese Western Theatre Command, which looks after their borders with India. Among other fascinating insights is who leads the Chinese military. So say in India, it's the Cabinet Committee on Security, the Prime Minister, Cabinet Committee on Security, then there's a National Security Council, National Security Council, Secretariat, etc., then Joint Chiefs of Staff. In China, it is a Central Military Commission, CMC, which is a unit of the Chinese Communist Party. That is why it's an army of the party. It is not an army of the state, it's an army of the party. It's also after decades now that one leader in China has all three key positions. What are these three key positions? He's the head of the party, General Secretary of the party, he's the president of the country, and he's also the chairman of the Central Military Commission, right? So all three powers now reside in him. So Xi Jinping is the one civilian on CMC, and he heads it. After that, there are two vice chairmen, and four others who are all generals. I think one of them is an admiral. That admiral too was a general until 2014. Then he joined the Navy. He joined the Navy not as a sailor, not as a carrier pilot or not as a submariner or anything. He joined the Navy as a political commissar. So he's also there. Now, Xi Jinping's own fascination for the military, this report marks out very clearly. He was the first civilian vice chairman of the Central Military Commission under Hu Jintao. So Xi Jinping has his eye out on the military. The senior most vice chairman of the commission now is, for the first time again in China's history, is an Air Force officer. That is General Xu Qiliang, who's the first Air Force officer to be at the top level, to have the top job in the Chinese military. And then there are others. I'm again showing you a graphic from the report. You can see the names and you can see the structure. There is no need for me to repeat this. Now, this report has separate sections on the Chinese Western Theatre Command, Northern Theatre Command, Eastern Theatre Command. What concerns us in India is the Western Theatre Command, because the main area of responsibility of the Western Theatre Command is the entire Tibetan frontier with India, entire, now north, east, west, central, all the sectors in it. And also the two sensitive states in China's underbelly. These are Xinjiang, where they have the ego trouble, and Tibet autonomous region, which they are always insecure about. So that is what the Western Theatre Command does. And see the graphic that I'm using from the report on my screen. That tells you what is located there. And you can see, if you just see Air Force is the simplest, the first column, you can see Air Force has two group armies, two military districts, two big air bases or two big headquarter air bases, one rocket forces base, and then it has intelligence and others. And similarly, PLA Air Force and PLA Army have very extensive operations and installations in this Western theater zone. And you can see this is purely or entirely directed towards India. Once again, look at this chart again from the report. That is the comparative defense budgets. And mind you, health warning, Chinese defense budget, the report also says that, look, they spend a lot more than what their official budget actually shows, because, you know, figures in China, how much transparency is there, your guess is as good as mine. So even on this basis, China's official defense budget now is $209 billion. In comparison, India now is $64.8 billion. That is less than 1/3. Japan is $55 billion. Russia is $66.8 billion. South Korea is $48 billion. Taiwan is $15.4 billion. So China alone, even in its official defense budget, is just a little less than India, Japan, Russia, South Korea, Taiwan put together. And in fact, if you make a realistic estimation of China's defense budget, chances are that it exceeds all of these. And then it's investing a lot more on ICBMs, on nuclear weapons, on launch on warning systems. That's why all these new silo parks are coming up, which are hardened silo parks. And finally, what I also find fascinating is the stuff that this report mentions about China's espionage efforts. And what is it that they say the Chinese now investing a lot in espionage, particularly industrial espionage. What is it they are looking for? They are looking for radiation hardened integrated circuits, monolithic microwave integrated circuits, accelerometers, gyroscopes, communication jamming equipment, dynamic random access memory. Now, I can't explain all of this, but I know that many of you are nerds who will know this, but all of this sounds like high-tech stuff. And the interesting thing is that FBI director, that is Christopher Wray, he has been quoted in this report as saying that of the 5,000 counterintelligence cases that the FBI is pursuing right now, more than half pertain to China. More than half pertain to China. In fact, in 2020, FBI registered a China-related counterintelligence or espionage case every 10 hours. That is how extensive the Chinese espionage effort in America is. And then this report goes on to list some of the more interesting or more important cases of this Chinese espionage. So that you should check out yourself. This is a very significant report. Please don't miss it. All of us have a stake in it, because the strategic competition with China has now moved on to a completely different plane. It's not about some border outpost or this bank or that bank of Pentagon, or this patrolling point or that patrolling point.